Okay. Respected senior INS members and friends, I wish Happy New Year to the people of Andhra, Karnataka, Telangana, and Maharashtra. Today being a first day of the Chaitra Masa. Today it is Ugadi, Gudi Padwa, and so on and so forth. So very auspicious day to welcome Dr. Sethi to our forum. I am happy to welcome all the members to the 19th INS webinar. Objective of this webinar, which is a part of outreach program of INS, is to invite eminent speakers, executives, industry leaders to give talk on science, nuclear science, and engineering. It was in fact desire of many members to also invite non-DAE experts to share their views and give perspective of their field of expertise. Keeping this in mind, INS has been identifying eminent speakers in public. Today we have a talk by Dr. Manpreet Sethi, Distinguished Fellow in Center of Air Power Studies, New Delhi, and has specialization in nuclear security. On behalf of INS Webinar Subcommittee and on my own behalf, I welcome you, Dr. Sethi, to our webinar platform. It is indeed a great pleasure to know from you about nuclear terrorism, nuclear safety, challenges, and mitigation measures. It is a subject of great importance in today's world, standing on a crossroad of conflicts, espionage, state-sponsored militancy, hacking, cybercrime, and so on and so forth. For a committed group of people in today's digital world, penetrating sensitive installation has become quite normal. Dr. Sethi has been writing extensively on nuclear strategy, non-proliferation, armaments, arms control, ballistic missile, defense systems, and so on. She has also given several talks on prevention and detection of threats, response to threat, sabotage, unauthorized access, and illegal activities. I am sure our members will be made aware of the new dimensions of terrorism and new security issues. I again welcome you, Dr. Sethi, to our webinar series of talk. And I request our Honorable Secretary to Indian Nuclear Society, Shri S.K. Malhotra, to give his opening remark.
Friends, a very good evening to all of you. As all of you know, up to day before yesterday, we were engaged in our INSAC 22, the INS Annual Conference 2022. I think around this time, we were winding it up 48 hours back. After many years, we could have it, and particularly feeling very happy and satisfied over having been able to organize that conference with, of course, from our own mouth, it may not look nice, but I think on a self-assessment to us, it was reasonably successful.
Of course.
And I'm sure, friends, all of you must be hearing about the threats of a nuclear war on your television sets and other media, particularly in the present world situation. India, which has been the victim of terrorism for many decades, and most of these terrorism activities in India have their epicenter, not within India, but in our neighboring countries. And some of these neighboring countries have nuclear weapons. And to add to that misery is the fact that they do not have a very stable kind of democracy or a stable kind of government itself. Even you must be hearing about the developments in one of these countries last 3-4 days, what is happening there. So naturally, India is very rightly concerned and worried about nuclear terrorism, given the unstable form of governments and possessing the nuclear technology. So tomorrow, what may happen? I mean, it's beyond our imagination. So in today's webinar by Dr. Manpreet Sethi, we will hear about nuclear terrorism, what it is, how much concerned we should be about it, and the ways and means to mitigate these threats, and whether we are fully prepared for doing so, and what else we could do. Probably we are going to hear all this from Manpreet Sethi. So without taking any more time, I think I will welcome Manpreet ji to share with us her knowledge and her work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malhotra ji. Before I call upon the speaker to give her presentation, I have a pleasant duty to introduce her to the INS members. Dr. Manpreet Sethi, Distinguished Fellow at Center for Air Power Studies, New Delhi, leads the project of nuclear security. She is an expert on entire range of nuclear issues with over 100 papers in academic journals of repute to her credit. Over the last 24 years, she has been researching and writing on subjects related to nuclear energy, strategy, non-proliferation, disarmament, arms control, ballistic missile defense. Her book on nuclear strategy, India's March towards credible deterrent in 2009, is deemed essential reading at many war colleges. This is a very significant achievements, no doubt. Besides, she has also authored, edited, co-authored 8 other books. Her lectures regularly are at the National Defense College and other leading establishments of Indian Armed Forces, police and foreign services. She has been participant on all flagship nuclear policy conferences in USA, Russia, European Union, China, and India. She is a member of Prime Minister's Informal Group on Disarmament in 2012 and of the Executive Board of Indian Pugwash Society. She has also been part of several Track 2 initiatives. She is currently on board of the Asia Pacific Leadership Network and a consultant with the Global Nuclear Abolition Forum. She is also a founding member of Women in India, Women in Nuclear in India. In recognition of her consistent work, she was awarded the prestigious Subramaniam Award in 2014, an award conferred by IDSA on a scholar for excellence in strategic and security studies. In a rare honor for civilian, on Air Force Day in 2020, she was commanded by the Chief of Armed Staff for her dedication and professional ability. I think this is, we may take some time to digest this kind of a biodata, because we hear the biodata of scientists and engineers from nuclear. This is something very different from us, but it is very, very heartening to have with us Dr. Manpreet Sethi. Ma'am, may I request you to start your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. My gratitude to you for giving me this opportunity of sharing with you some of my research and understanding on nuclear terrorism and security. It's indeed an honor to be able to connect with the DAE family through the INS platform. And while you said that you were looking for non-DAE people to take the lectures, I consider myself part of the DAE family because my father-in-law came from the 3rd batch of the DAE training school.
I am sorry for that.
So as you said, sir, mostly you have nuclear scientists and engineers who are the participants today and who you engage with regularly. I'm a political scientist. So I look at the politics of all of these issues, and that's what I hope to bring out before you, the political landscape as it exists globally and for us, particularly in India and the region, and how that is a challenge to our national security. Also, before I start, we are meeting today in the backdrop of the Russia-UK conflict, which is ongoing. We are into the 38th day, I think, today of the conflict, and some of the aspects of security of nuclear power facilities and infrastructure in Ukraine have come out in stark, reality from what is happening there. So what has happened in Chernobyl, in Zaporizhia, in Kharkiv, in a nuclear facility there, all of this has raised concerns about nuclear security in war zone areas. And when I was preparing this presentation and looking at nuclear terrorism as the threat, that's not a concern that the world has seen up till now in terms of what we are seeing in Ukraine today. So this security concern, the IAEA Director General went to Ukraine to try to find a way of making sure that the security and safety dimensions of the nuclear facilities in Ukraine would not be compromised, despite it being in the war zone. This is going to be a matter of concern and will, I think, become a new dimension of nuclear security. But for today, I'm going to be looking at nuclear terrorism as we understand it, and how nuclear security then is so important in order to provide the mitigation measures against the threat of nuclear terrorism. So moving on then, let me start with this global snapshot, just to give you an idea of why nuclear security is such an important thing. There are 442 reactors in 31 countries that are existing today. And the important dimension from nuclear reactors is the nuclear material, which is used there, whether it's highly enriched uranium or it is plutonium from the spent fuel. Globally, 15 million packages of radiological material are transported each year on public roads, railways, and ships. The IAEA, which maintains an incident and trafficking database from 1995 onwards, to this database, 141 countries contribute and it's a voluntary contribution by these countries about any incidents of radioactive material, nuclear material, uranium from the mining, etc. sector, if it is found to be illegally available for any kind of sale or smuggling. So according to this database, in 2020, 125 incidents which were illegal of this kind were reported by 25 states. In 2017, the number was 166. Majority of the reports that have been reported as part of this database has been loss of radiological material from industrial or medical uses. So protection of both nuclear material and radiological material is a national responsibility as per global nuclear governance. So any country which is holding any kind of a nuclear material or radiological material has to take responsibility for the safety and the security of that particular material in order to make sure that there are no threats of nuclear terrorism that can emerge as a result of their holdings. This is the understanding that countries have on how they are going to provide for nuclear security. But by providing this snapshot, I just wanted to provide this understanding about what are we talking about. We're looking at 442 reactors. We are looking at the nuclear material which is in those reactors. We are looking at radiological material which is transiting from one place to the other, plus that is domestically or internationally. And some of the reported incidents, these are only reported, one doesn't know how much more could be happening otherwise, but these reported incidents on the kind of smuggling, theft, and insecurities that come with that. Now, I mentioned global nuclear governance. I look at global nuclear governance as part of a three-legged stool. And this three legs of this stool of global nuclear governance are nuclear safety, which is to ensure that you have error-free operations, that the reactors, the research facilities, etc., which are running can run safely without any harm to the people or to the environment. The second leg of the stool is nuclear security, which means that you need to have incident-free operations where there is no threat of any kind to the security of the establishment. And for a long period of time, I have seen a confusion between safety and security. But understanding the kind of background of the audience that I'm speaking to, I'm sure all of you have this absolute clarity about the difference in safety and security. And the third leg of this tool of global governance are nuclear safeguards, which is to have proliferation-free operations, that there is no chance of clandestine activity when a country has declared itself as non-nuclear weapon state, and therefore its nuclear facilities are under the safeguards provided by the International Atomic Energy Agency. All non-nuclear weapon states are subject to comprehensive safeguard agreements, which means that all of the nuclear facilities that they have are under safeguards. Unlike the case of for India, for example, India or Pakistan, which have an ambiguous status under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and therefore we don't have full scope safeguards. We don't have a comprehensive safeguards agreement. We have what are known as facility specific safeguards, depending on the facilities that we have offered to the IAEA to provide those safeguards on. But these are the three dimensions. In order to ensure that peaceful uses of nuclear energy can continue without the fear of having any incidents of safety, security, or proliferation. Now, all of this is ensured at the international level through some treaties, through some formal and informal cooperation arrangements, and through norms and practices, not always by laws, but by the norms which have been created, the best practices that are shared between the countries on how they're going to make sure that safety, security, and safeguards are maintained on their nuclear programs. IAEA, as I mentioned earlier, is the nodal agency. It has both an advisory and an enforcement role. Advisory role is essentially for safety and security dimensions, where it cannot enforce. If it finds that something is amiss, it can only bring it to the notice of the country and let them resolve it. But on proliferation, because it is maintaining safeguards, it has an enforcement role. Again, this enforcement is by bringing it to the notice of the IAEA Board of Governors. And if it is not resolved at that level, like it happened in the case of Iran, then it goes up to the United Nations Security Council for further resolution at that level. Now, essentially, when we say nuclear terrorism, this is what we are talking about, that the chances of a non-state actor interfering with the safe performance of our nuclear program is not hampered. And therefore, nuclear terrorism and nuclear security then to address the threat of nuclear terrorism is the objective of my talk today. So looking at the types of nuclear terrorism, there are four essential activities which are seen to be as part of nuclear terrorism. And the first two, I would say, have a low probability of happening, but the last two that I will bring out before you is what is a matter of concern for the world and particularly for India. So the first kind of nuclear terrorism that can happen is if there was use of a ready-made nuclear weapon from an existing arsenal. So from a country that has a nuclear arsenal, that has nuclear warheads of some kind, these are taken away by a non-state actor, by an unauthorized entity, by theft or by illegal purchase. We do remember that when the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, there was this whole talk about suitcase bombs, that Soviet Union had what were known as suitcase bombs, small tactical nuclear weapons, which had gone missing. About 100 of them are supposed to be missing still till today because they haven't been accounted for. But fortunately, none of them has surfaced anywhere. So one doesn't know where, because also countries are very non-transparent about the nuclear weapons. So one can never be sure about what is being accounted for and what is the real arsenal that they have. So the problem in having this kind of a terrorism is that nuclear weapons are essentially big, they are accounted for, and they need delivery systems. And often they have what are known as permissive action links. So it's not as if somebody can get hold of a weapon and take it somewhere and detonate it, because there are very many checks and balances that go into actually detonating a nuclear weapon. So therefore, the chance of this kind of a nuclear terrorism happening is very low, where a nuclear weapon can be taken by somebody and exploded where they want to carry out an act of terrorism. The second type of nuclear terrorism could be if there was handover of a nuclear weapon by a state that believes in sponsoring terrorism, that believes that it's a good idea to carry out acts of terror on another country. But I would still say the probability of this is low. You know, countries might do terrorism, like we have experience from our neighborhood. Mr. Malhotra just mentioned the country which is going through this governance crisis right now, and which has shown a propensity for doing terrorism. You know, their strategy is to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. But I would say the chances of their sponsoring nuclear terrorism is still low, because if the state is functional and it's a rational entity, then it doesn't make sense for them to give a nuclear weapon to a non-state actor to detonate in a third country, because the chances of their being caught out is extremely high. And then the retaliation that will follow with nuclear weapons from the other country is going to make any objective useless that they were trying to achieve. So therefore, the chances of this kind of terrorism have been thought to be low, and it can be deterred by having good nuclear forensics, where you are suggesting to the country which is planning to do this kind of terrorism that you will be caught out. In fact, India has been not only building its own nuclear forensics capability, but also is a participant in the forensics of IAEA. And therefore, when you are part of this network, the chances of any country denying that it was responsible for an act of terrorism is low. And that's how you deter the possibility of this kind of nuclear terrorism. Now, the third kind of nuclear terrorism is the use of a radiological dispersal device, which is known in common parlance as the dirty bomb. This is essentially a small amount of radiological or nuclear material packaged with conventional explosives, which can be detonated in some place in order to create the scare that radiological emissions have taken place. And it's just the fear factor of this that would disrupt. In fact, this is known as the weapon of mass disruption, not destruction, because it's the economic, social, psychological disruption that will be caused to a particular place, which is going to be the real fear in this. So access of nuclear material through theft, purchase, or insider cooperation, because here we are talking about small quantities. We're not talking about a full nuclear weapon. We're only looking at small quantities of nuclear material or radiological material that could be purchased or provided through insider threat, and that could then be used in order to carry out an act of creating a dirty bomb. Smuggling of highly enriched uranium is relatively easier than plutonium, and access to radioactive isotopes is also easier than nuclear materials. So the chances of their being used in order to carry out an RDD attack is definitely higher than I would say of the first two kinds that I've spoken. And the last kind of nuclear terrorism is sabotage at a nuclear facility, which could be either using an airplane or a truckload of explosives. Again, it might not actually lead to a radiological disaster of the kind that we've seen, say, in Fukushima, but it would psychologically dent the security levels of the nation, and that is where the disruption would lie. Use of commandos from land and sea in order to take over the command and control, cause a LOCA incident, the loss of coolant accident, sabotage the control operations, or cyber attacks to disrupt command and control. And this last point has been talked about more and more in recent times as the cyber offensive capability of countries has grown, and the fear that you could interfere with command and control of at operational reactors in order to create an accident of LOCA and lead to some act of nuclear terrorism. So these are the four types of nuclear terrorism that are generally talked about. And I would say the biggest concerns are from the last two, the RDD and the sabotage possibilities. Though, of course, we do understand that all measures are taken. But being 2 steps ahead of terrorists is what is the necessity in order to understand what the chances of this are. Now, the question then is, why is nuclear security important for India? And I want to highlight a few things here. One, because we have a large nuclear program. We have an expansive nuclear infrastructure to handle all aspects of the fuel cycle. We have that mastery from uranium mining, extraction, prospecting, fuel making, as well as moving on to the end of the fuel cycle. Also, there are multiple users of radiological material, and these are only growing. I remember a statement being made in the parliament that we have doubled the use in the last 10 years of radiological material for various kinds, medicine, industry, agriculture, etc. So there are multiple users of the radiological material, and not everybody might be understanding the value of what they're handling enough to be able to keep them secure. India is also a very big country. As you know, the geographic expanse of this nation is huge. Not all parts are as well monitored and governed as some others might be. So we are looking at a disparity of various kinds within the country. We do have areas which are disturbed with insurgency, and therefore chances of insider threat, corruption, possibility of sabotage, etc., goes up in these regions. And most importantly, we have a neighborhood, which is a fomenter of terrorism, which believes, as I said, in this policy of leading India through 1,000 cuts. It believes that doing terrorism in order to keeping India unsettled is a good strategy for them. And therefore, periodically, we do have attacks taking place on India, which are traced back to the terror infrastructure, which is supported in terms of providing training, equipment, material, people, HR, to creating this infrastructure. And also this country has nuclear weapons. So it has a nuclear power program as well. So again, the infrastructure which is there from where leakages are possible are several in the case particularly of Pakistan. So therefore, this is the kind of scenario in which India is. And for us, therefore, nuclear security is a very important concern. In fact, I would say that for a long period of time, India managed this concern by itself. It's only in the last 10 years, when President Obama came into the White House, that he raised the concern about nuclear terrorism at the global level. He brought that international attention to nuclear terrorism, and India became a beneficiary of that because country like Pakistan had the spotlight on them. I don't know how many of you follow, for instance, the AQ Khan network that was run from Pakistan as a state enterprise of nuclear proliferation. This story was broken in 2003-04 at a global level. India was aware of this for a long period of time. India was bringing it to the attention of the international community, making representations to the US to say that nuclear proliferation is taking place in our region, but nobody was interested because the utility of Pakistan to the US was very high during that period of time. The war on terror had just started in 2001, and Pakistan was one of the countries working with the US against the war on terror. But in 2003-04, when this story was broken by the media about AQ Khan and the kind of proliferation that had taken place, that's from when the interest in trying to stop proliferation and the possibility of the non-state actor getting hold of any nuclear material became a major concern. And as I mentioned to you, by 2010, Obama had made, as part of the Nuclear Posture Review, which is a document that the US brings out explaining the threats that it faces. In fact, the latest one has just come out under President Biden. And nuclear terrorism in the Nuclear Posture Review that was brought out by Obama was put as the foremost threat that the US faced. And because when the US says something and everybody sort of listens to it, they have the power, the influence to be able to bring countries together on that particular issue. Obama had set into motion the nuclear security summits, which brought attention to the issue of nuclear terrorism, and several steps were taken. We'll talk a little about that later. So if nuclear security is a matter of concern for us, then how does India handle this concern? And I'm going to look at India's approach to nuclear security from two dimensions. What does it do at the domestic level? And how does it handle this threat, this concern at the international level? So for us, it's a serious national responsibility that must be performed on the basis of certain international benchmarks. There are some conventions, treaties, best practices at the international level, which are laid down by different agencies. And India has said that we will look at those benchmarks in order to handle the issue at the national level. So we have the necessary legislation, institutional and regulatory agencies which are handling the aspects of nuclear security. We've also wholeheartedly participated in international efforts. So treaties, summits, and reporting. And I'll try to unpack these in my next few slides. So at the national level then, India's approach to national nuclear security can be seen across 3 or 4 things. One is security of material. So both nuclear material and radiological material, its accounting, inventorizing, and protection is something that is very seriously maintained. Use of technological aids for surveillance and intelligence collection, more and more of this is being used. We have record and registry of off-site radiological material. Inventories are maintained of that. And this has to be returned to the Department of Atomic Energy after use. This aspect of the radiological material really came into sharp focus after the incident that took place in Mayapuri, the junkyard. I think all of us are familiar with that. How that radiological source that was sold as part of junk by Delhi University, and it was found in the market in Mayapuri, and led to certain fatalities as a result of that. But this brought attention to the need for the DAE to maintain a very strict registry of where the material is going and how it must be returned to it after its life is over. The second aspect after material security is physical security of the facilities. And for this, there are specially chosen, trained and equipped CISF personnel. In my own visits to some of the nuclear facilities, I have found them to be extremely well-trained, motivated, and very sure about the kind of processes, the standard operating procedures that they have to maintain for every entry exit of the people, including those who are the regular workers in the establishment. There is an IPS officer who's on the rolls of the DAE at various establishments. The connection with the police is extremely high and strong, including about availability of intelligence inputs on what could possibly be happening. There are personnel reliability programs. I think these can be further improved and more rigorously imposed than they might be. But the need for having these personnel reliability programs where the background checks of the people are regularly done, including psychological understanding of the concerns that might be bothering them, becomes very important when we are looking at sensitive facilities like the nuclear establishment. Perimeter security through the use of technological aids. So surveillance as well as integration with border management teams to counter possibilities of nuclear smuggling. So all of this in terms of physical security is how India is handling the situation. And also then the security of technology. For this, export controls are extremely important. And for a long period of time, we were at the other end of export controls, where we were seen as the victims of export controls because some high technologies were denied to us. But as India has, after the Indo-US nuclear deal, been accommodated into several regimes that were controlling high technologies, we have now also harmonized our own control lists as part of export controls with these other regimes. You would have heard, of course, of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, but also the MTCR, Wassenaar arrangement, etc. So India has harmonized its control list to come at par with everybody else at the international level. We do have end user verifications for any kind of equipment technology which is on the control list and which goes in for any kind of export. And most important here is outreach to the industry and the states to make them understand what is the value of this particular exercise of export controls, end user verifications, the value of compliance with those export controls without interfering with the ease of licensing. So enforcement and yet allowing an activity to take place, this is where the outreach to the industry and the states becomes extremely important. Also, as part of security of technology, I wanted to mention what India passed in 2005 as the WMD, the Weapons of Mass Destruction and Delivery Systems Act. This was necessary as part of the international instrument called the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540, which was enacted in 2004 at the global level. The idea of this UNSCR 1540 was to make countries arrive at legislation and outreach activities to the industry to make sure that no unauthorized access to WMD material of any kind, including delivery systems. That's something that India added to this particular legislation. to make sure no unauthorized activity takes place, no unauthorized access, possession, sale, production of this kind of activity can go on. And this is something which is really important because it lays down all kinds of punitive measures for the kinds of illegal activities that might be undertaken. So this is the aspect of security of technology. At the international level, there are two things that I want to point out that India is participating in. Firstly, it is a member and it is in compliance with two important international treaties against nuclear terrorism. The first one is the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendment. So CPP and NNMA, in fact, the state parties of CPP and NNMA have just finished their meeting, I think today, in Vienna, looking at the aspects of how to better improve countries' compliance with this particular instrument. And I'll talk a little about it in my next slide. But this is an agreement that was concluded in 1987. And then the amendment came in 2005. And I'll show you what is the significance of that amendment. The second instrument is the International Convention on Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, ICSANT, which was concluded in 2007, again at the international level, making countries adopt national measures in order to avoid the possibility of any act of nuclear terrorism. Now, I wanted to just explain these two instruments in a little detail for you to understand. As I mentioned, CPPNMA in 2005. So initially, the CPPNM, which was concluded in 1987, was applicable only to international transportation of nuclear material. When nuclear material was being transferred from one country to another in the international channels, whether it was airspace or sea-based transfer, certain provisions had to be maintained. And that is what this convention was telling us about. But the 2005 amendment extended this treaty protection to domestic storage and transport, because within countries also there is a fair amount of movement of nuclear and radiological material that takes place. And this then was again put under the umbrella of this convention. So it enhanced the mechanisms for cooperation to locate and recover stolen and smuggled nuclear material in order to mitigate the radiological consequences of sabotage. And as you can see, these have been the major concerns of the international community. And through this convention, these were sought to be addressed. There are 129 state parties to this convention. Overall, as you know, there are about 190 plus countries. So not everybody has signed on to the convention, but we do have a significant number of members. Some of the important holdouts which are of concern are like DPRK, North Korea, Iran, and some other countries in Southeast Asia, which have held back from joining here. As I said, this meeting which happened in Vienna just now has tried to come up with measures on how they are going to universalize, how to get the other countries to join in into this particular convention. This is just another way of depicting what the CPPNM and amendment, how they are different. And as you can see on physical protection, on the offenses which have been identified, and on the kind of cooperation which is mandated by the amendment, we are going one step further from the CPPNM to greater, more rigor in trying to enforce the amendment. ICSANT has 115 signatories right now. But only 99 countries have ratified it. Different countries, as you know, have this process of signing, and then their parliament has to ratify the agreement. So as of now, less than 100 countries have ratified it. The idea of this instrument is to counter nuclear terrorism by mandating national laws that impose punitive action. It sounds very simple that why can countries not draft national laws? But some of the smaller countries, and when I have participated in conferences where they get to voice their concerns about it, sometimes they just don't have the ability to draft legislation which would be able to address a concern like this. Some of the smaller countries don't even think it's a concern. They say we don't have any nuclear or radiological material on our soil. So therefore, why should we be, spending our energy in creating this kind of a law? But the point is that transit of nuclear material, radiological material from these countries remains a matter of concern. And to get them to understand that they should not become a weak link of any kind in this process of nuclear terrorism, they must have these laws. So you have to then provide them that expertise. And as I mentioned to you, the IAEA, in its advisory capacity, then provides help to these countries to draft legislation of this nature. The non-signatories of this are Algeria, Angola, DPRK, Egypt, Iran, Sudan, Venezuela. And as you can see, all of these countries are really countries of concern from the governance point of view, and therefore could become weak links. And therefore the need to, constantly engage with them to get them to understand the value of what is this whole process. The second level at which India has engaged with the international community on nuclear security is by providing support for all of these initiatives that I've listed here. So the Nuclear Security Summit process, which I mentioned earlier, from 2010 to 2016, 4 summits were held. And India at the highest level, the Prime Minister went for, I think, at least 2 or 3 of them, participated in order to make sure that, we were engaged at the topmost level on the aspect of nuclear security. India has contributed to the IAEA Nuclear Security Fund. We have contributions on nuclear forensics. The Center of Excellence that India has created in the Global Center on Nuclear Energy Partnership, GCNEP, which has 2 schools which are dedicated to nuclear security. And of course, currently, because the Nuclear Security Summit process wound up with President Obama, India is participant of the Nuclear Security Contact Group, which was formulated after the security process, summit process. And there are 5 action plans to which India is contributing on this front. The IAEA has an advisory, but a very important role to play in nuclear security. It is a provider of advice, of guidelines and assistance on how you're going to manage this threat. I already mentioned to you the ITDB, which is maintained from 1945. IAEA brought out the Code of Conduct on Safety and Security of Radiological Material in 2003. And from 2009 onwards, it has been supportive of national efforts to enforce nuclear security worldwide. Now, what has been the progress on this aspect of nuclear security from 2010 onwards? And I would say there are 3 R's which are important. One is raised level of awareness of nuclear security. The attention to this particular issue, which was missing at the global level, at the highest political level, where you get the political leaders to understand the value of something, then you can get the lower functionaries to look at it more seriously. So this came as a result of the Nuclear Security Summit process. It brought the issue into the ambit of national priority, and it brought together global leaders, industry, and experts, because the stakedom in the nuclear infrastructure in countries is of many, many kinds. Reporting is the second R, because this has then ensured action. So, interestingly, the nuclear security summits, countries evolved the concept of what they call national gift baskets, that they would come to the summit with something to offer to them about what they have done in their own countries. So Pakistan, for instance, signed on to CPPNMA, which it had not done for a period of time. It signed on to ICSANT. So that was the gift basket, the gift that they were bringing to the Nuclear Security Summit. Commitments were made of national actions, and there was an adherence to international benchmarks. And as I said, if it's at the highest political level, that attention is there, all of this goes on within the country then. And lastly, a broader understanding of nuclear security came into being. So it was not just about protection of radiological and nuclear material. In fact, to start with, it was only protection of nuclear material. Then radiological material, often sources came into it, security of sensitive information, security in transport, and the interface between safety and security. Because for one, you need transparency, and for the other, you're a little cagey about your opening up. So the interface between the two also is something that began to be realized much more. Some of the other progress areas since 2010 has been certified training for nuclear security management, From material security to personnel competence, we moved the entire gamut of the security dimension, and also cooperation between the centers of excellence. Now, I will end with some challenges that I still find in the nuclear security measures. Firstly, there is lack of uniformity in the recognition of the threat itself and the rigor in implementation. As I mentioned, not every country is convinced that it should invest its energy into the idea of nuclear security because they don't feel that they need to be there. But this lack of shared threat perception is something which can be extremely harmful. There has to be an ownership of this threat by all the countries. Only then will we have universal acceptance of the treaties, which is currently, as I mentioned to you, not there. The need to balance national sovereignty with international responsibility. Again, countries are very non-desirous of any kind of a dictum coming from the top. The UN Security Council Resolution 1540 was not easily accepted by all countries. They felt that it was something that, we were being made to do some things from the big powers without being made aware of what was the need for this as part of international responsibility that they bear as members of this Committee of Nations. All of this is part of voluntary accounting and reporting. And some countries perceive it as burdensome. That, you have these reports to be prepared all the time and presented to the IAEA, to the UNSCR 1540 committee. And they don't have the resources to be able to do this again and again and provide this to the international level. And most importantly, all of these don't have any punishment for non-compliance at the international level. In any case, there's no international governance body which is managing this. These are all in terms of voluntary measures to be taken at the national level. You have punishment for non-compliance at the national level. But if you hold a country accountable for something which has happened, as we saw in the case of Pakistan, you cannot do anything about it. There is no punishment for non-compliance in that case. And lastly, of course, there is the weak link problem that does exist. I will end with some suggestions for improvement. I think sharing of technologies for detection is extremely important. And these are technologies which are expensive. Unless we can have scanners at ports, decontamination techniques and materials, medical countermeasures, awareness of this, plus the equipment which is needed, made available to countries which could be vulnerable to these kinds of activities, that's important. And since quite a lot of this is actually manufactured either in the Western world, in Europe or in the US, and is quite expensive, the tendency to not invest in them certainly is extremely high. We need sharing of advances in nuclear forensics because help in prevention of nuclear terrorism through deterrence, through the threat of punishment, that if you are caught out, if we are able to trace that this is from where the nuclear material came, and you will be subjected then to any kind of military action, that deterrence can be one way of preventing this nuclear terrorism. We need sharing of best practices and experiences in enforcement. And again, as I said, countries are hesitant sometimes to show their lapses which have happened in their countries for the fear of being vilified by the rest of the international community. So arriving at that balance of how much you're able to reveal and how much you want to hide, that sharing of best practices is important. And yet we haven't been able to find always this happening. Sharing of information on managing spent fuel and nuclear waste, again, important dimensions, because this is a repository again which can lend itself to nuclear terrorism. Some general challenges are that the need for nuclear security is today more than ever. We have a period where there are increasing risks and there are increasing threats. Effective nuclear security, however, requires good international cooperation. But unfortunately, that is completely missing in today's times. I mean, we are living in those times where there are differences between the major nuclear weapon states. Already in the case of Russia, Ukraine, you've got Russia and China on one side, and you've got the three other countries on the other. There are rifts between the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states. They don't have an understanding on several issues which are of concern, even as there are good relations between terrorist organizations. They are far more networked today than I would say the international state community is. and dilution of the attention to nuclear issues at the highest political level is something that remains a matter of concern. My conclusion then is that nuclear security is a journey. It's not a destination. We have to be constantly at it. You can't say, I have reached nuclear security today. It needs constant awareness and action. It's constantly in evolution. You need understanding of the threats and collective action, and you need both a balance of soft and hard measures. So it's not just about treaties and conventions. It's also about the safety and security culture in the nuclear establishments, cooperation between centers of excellence, which can collectively then help us to achieve nuclear security and stay ahead of the threat of nuclear terrorism. I'll stop here now and I look forward. I can see already some people have put up their hands.
Thank you, Dr. Manpreet Sethi. An excellent lecture, totally taking us into a different realm than what we generally look at. We are always worried about safety. We keep on studying safety and we keep on emphasizing safety. But you have very nicely pointed out the difference between the safety and the security. Although I had some glimpse of that during my job at Nuclear Power Corporation, because we had a multi-agency group which would look for the nuclear safety. And but that was a sort of what you can say, a very small part of my job. But today we have really got what is nuclear safety, what needs to be done for it, and what are different actors or the stakeholders in the field. And you have very nicely told us what is nuclear terrorism, what are various pathways of that, what are different measures, the different type of terrorist activities, and how do we manage it, including the cyber attacks. In fact, there was a state-sponsored cyber attack for shutting down the nuclear plants and the nuclear activities of some other state. So that has become a reality now, which was only in the fictions. So that also you have covered very nicely. And basically the security of material, the training of the people, the conventions, etc. So it was a, what you can say, all round covering all the aspects of nuclear safety, and which were pretty new to us. And we are very thankful to you for such a fantastic lecture. Of course, we started the lecture. I mean, before lecture, there were questions. So I understand, or I believe that there will be many more questions in the minds of listeners. So we can start the question answer session. So please, you can put up on the chat or you can raise your hand and ask the question. Please go ahead.
Pradeep is there. Pradeep rose his hand first.
Yeah.
First of all, it was an excellent talk. Thanks to Dr. Manpreet Sethi. With her permission and chairman's permission, I like to make some small 2-3 comments. The first point is maybe one slide in between has skipped. So I think I will give the clarification. When we talk about the terrorism, the nuclear terrorism and radiological terrorism are independently discussed in international platforms. Both comes under the nuclear security, issues of nuclear security. So when we talk about radiological terrorism, it is usage of radioactive material, either with explosive or for dispersion purpose, which is not including nuclear material. But nuclear terrorism definitely includes usage of highly enriched uranium, plutonium, etc., which is expected to provide some yield and more devastating or damage to the society. Is my first point. Second, I'm very happy that she stressed this point. As long as all countries, whether it is small or big, they are not developing this prevention mechanism to detect the smuggling of nuclear and other radioactive material, only some advanced country doing alone will not do any purpose. And this is a real challenge. Second, she mentioned about the data, the published large number of events of smuggling of nuclear material. Let me tell you, the quantity is so small, unless it is, mobilized and assembled large quantities in multiple, this type of smuggling, it is not going to be a very big challenge, but international community, including IAEA, is looking at it. What is the chance of getting sufficient material to develop into an improvised nuclear device, which can be one of the issues of nuclear terrorism. Now, coming to the deterrence. Deterrence of nuclear forensic, yes, it can do a wonderful job, but it requires a very big effort as far as a data bank, which every country should have. And if you are able to attribute, even if somebody is doing it, from which country it is originated, it will be a deterrence. But I personally believe the biggest deterrence is the point which you mentioned almost in the end, the prevention mechanism. If every country is having the detection, and which ultimately will lead to prevention of smuggling of nuclear material, that is the biggest deterrent. But again, as was mentioned by her, when you are talking about detection of nuclear material, is a much bigger challenge than detection of radioactive material. That is why it is believed usage of RDD, radiological dispersal device, as a part of radiological terrorism, that can be much more challenging, because the probability of assembling or getting the material is much easier. But at the same time, a person who is developing a improvised nuclear device or nuclear terrorism, he is exposed to much lesser radiation exposure, and that challenges, these are all different subjects. So before concluding, let me appreciate the points and the presentation in a very excellent manner she has done. And I had a lot of interaction with her earlier in CAPS Delhi, and always I remember the information she used to collect from international documents and meetings. She used to share with almost all experts and others in the country, and this is very useful. So again, I also like to stress this point, and I used to even stress on behalf of India in IAEA. IAEA, when they are advocating to all countries of members of IAEA to develop these systems and place to prevent the smuggling of nuclear material, it is not enough. Even countries which are not part of IAEA, even if they permit it, or even if they are silent on the rejection, the whole world will not be escaping from the threat of the challenge of nuclear and radiological terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradeep, for your contributions. Any further question? Dr. Chirag Vyas, you have raised the hand.
Venugopal.
Yes, thank you, sir. I would like to thank Indian Nuclear Society as well as Dr. Sethi for giving us a very nice opportunity to hear this very nice lecture. And I would like to have two questions in respect to, Dr. Sethi, considering the present situation between Russia and Ukraine, and, Russia threatening Ukraine with nuclear weapon attacks, what amendments would you believe needs to be added to make, at least a permanent member of United Nations Security Council accountable of such non-responsible remarks and actions? That is my first question. And my second question is about non-proliferation treaty as well as nuclear umbrella. See, non-proliferation treaty says that it is an international treaty whose objective is to prevent spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon technology, to promote cooperation in peaceful use of nuclear energy, whereas nuclear umbrella guarantees that is, by a nuclear weapon state to defend a non-nuclear allied state, in the context usually the Security Alliance of United Nations with Japan and South Korea and other countries. How this makes sense, because it is contradicting the non-proliferation treaty, whereas you are encouraged to stop use of nuclear weapons. I would like your inputs and perspectives in that direction. Thank you, ma'am.
So you want me to answer the questions, or should we take a round of questions?
No, I would think that you can answer the question so that we can go to the next question.
Okay. Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Pradeep Kumar, who really has been my teacher, I would say, on many aspects of nuclear security. So, sir, when you give me pass marks for the presentation, I'm really, really thankful and very happy to hear that. I'm also glad that you made this distinction between radiological and nuclear terrorism, though I did mention it, but I didn't mention the term radiological terrorism. So I'm glad that you made that evident too. To Mr. Vyas, sir, on your two questions, both very important questions. So firstly, on Russia and Ukraine and the noises that it has been making on using nuclear weapons. So as part of nuclear strategy, this is common. Countries do make noises about this because, as I was mentioning earlier, nuclear weapons are for nuclear deterrence. And deterrence is actually a psychological manipulation. It is a mind game when you're trying to signal to your adversary that you better stop what you're doing because I don't like it. And if you carry on, then I'm going to use my nuclear weapons against you. So this is what Russia is doing. This is what, for instance, Pakistan does. When we have an international, a crisis between the two countries, you can hear Pakistan making all kinds of nuclear noises. And this often happens early in conflict. We are seeing the same pattern in, Russia's behavior as well. Because what you want is to deter the conventional conflict which is going on by suggesting that I'm now going to escalate to the nuclear level. So it's not worth your while to carry on with that conflict. But because Ukraine has gone on, standing up to Russia, and I would say it's largely because of NATO help and US, equipment and weapons which have been provided to Ukraine, the messaging that Russia has been doing is to NATO and US that you don't step into this conflict, because the moment you do that, then I will be tempted to go to the nuclear level. So this kind of bluster, brinksmanship behavior is part of nuclear strategy. And there's nothing that can be done to say that because you're a P5 member, you should not be behaving like this, and that the international community can do anything about it. We've had the General Assembly resolutions against this, and while India has abstained for its own reasons, 141 countries supported the resolution to get Russia to back off, and Russia hasn't. So there's very little that the international community can do except for what it is doing in terms of imposing sanctions, international criticism of the, of this whole activity which is going on, but little more than what can be done in this aspect. And as I said, making these noises about use of nuclear weapons is essentially to stop the activity. It is not that Russia will find it very easy or even useful militarily to use nuclear weapons. The last use of nuclear weapons was only 1945. For 70 years, countries which have been in a state where they were dealing with non-nuclear weapon states. Look at US against Korea or US against Vietnam. They still could not use nuclear weapons. And here we are thinking that Russia will be able to get away with the use of nuclear weapons if Russia is going to face retaliation with nuclear weapons after its use. Because after all, it has to decide what is going to be the target of its nuclear weapon. If it's Ukraine, then very interestingly, and not many people know this, China has provided, the nuclear umbrella that you mentioned, China has provided a nuclear umbrella to Ukraine. In 2013, it entered into an agreement. And if Russia was to use a nuclear weapon against Ukraine, it is bringing itself into conflict with China, which is its biggest ally and friend at this moment. And if it finds a target in a European country, then it's bringing the wrath of nuclear NATO upon itself. So the use of the bluster about nuclear weapons use will continue from Russia, but I don't think we can very easily expect that he will be able to use the nuclear weapon. To your second question, sir, about NPT and nuclear umbrella, both of them are essentially for the same purpose of non-proliferation. The NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, was crafted, yes, you said, one of the objectives is to allow countries to have peaceful use of nuclear energy as long as they remain non-nuclear. So non-proliferation, that they will not go towards nuclear weapons, is one of the very important objectives of the NPT. And at the same time, the extended deterrence or the nuclear umbrella, which was provided by the US to Japan, South Korea, was also to stop them from going nuclear. That I will protect you, you don't build your own nuclear weapons. So that is also a non-proliferation measure. The objective of both is same. The hope was that the NPT will also take the world to nuclear disarmament, that peaceful use of nuclear energy will continue, but weapons will be given up. Unfortunately, that has remained a pipe dream. None of the 5 nuclear weapon states are interested in disarmament, and certainly not now. In fact, my concern is more countries are going to see value in having nuclear weapons in order to protect themselves. So we might be entering a phase of proliferation rather than non-proliferation at this moment.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam.
Yeah.
Manpreet Sethi is an excellent presentation. You have only covered safety and security and safeguards. I was involved in safeguards activities. Safeguards is a very important thing because safety and security is a state subject. Safeguards is an international subject where IAEA comes in the picture. And you already talked about P5 countries And people like India, which is facility-specific countries with the safeguards agreement with the IAEA, the P5 countries, they are supposed to give plutonium holding annually. So if you look at the plutonium holding, some of the people give the same numbers every year, alternate year, everything. But I remember very well, many of the facilities which has operated reprocessing plants, they have several SQs. That means significant quantity. Each significant quantity is 8 kilograms of plutonium, unaccounted for. It is openly available, unaccounted for plutonium. People say it has been exported to friendly countries of United States. So mainly to bring in P5 into something, just like they are asking us to put everything under safeguards, something has to be done, because stock of plutonium is more than about 2,000 tons of plutonium. This is a major issue because P5 doesn't come to any table.
Thank you, sir, for drawing our attention to this very important issue. Unfortunately, again, I go back to the NPT. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is what made the IAEA and the Safeguards Program possible. And when the NPT made this discrimination between the responsibilities and privileges of the P5 versus the non-nuclear weapon states, they accounted for themselves very little responsibility on any of this. The understanding was they already have nuclear weapons. So therefore, one doesn't have, the IAEA doesn't have to expend too much of its energy and resources on them, that it should be safeguarding the programs only of the non-nuclear weapon states. So you're right, sir. In fact, the Nuclear Security Summit process, if it had continued, the next focus of attention was going to be on plutonium. Now, India is a little wary of this, getting into this, because for us, plutonium is actually an asset which has to go into our fast breeder program and then to the third stage of the cycle. So while calls at the international level have been made that just like the other P5 countries, we should also be transparent about our plutonium stockpiles, we don't like that idea, because for us, it's for our civilian program, not all of it is for the strategic program. That's something that India has been a little hesitant about, but I agree with you that you can't do anything about the P5. The NPT was given an indefinite and unconditional extension in 1995. So the non-nuclear weapon states lost all the leverage that they had to hold the P5 accountable to anything. And that's the reality of today's times. So we can't do anything about it.
What about FMT, Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty?
There is no sign right now of the FMCT. It has to be negotiated in the Conference on Disarmament. The CD has been stalemated for over 15, 20 years now because of the individual interests of nations. So there is no shared interest to get to an FMCT. India has said that we would be happy to participate. We do want to stop further fissile material production because it's in our national security interest that our neighbors, which are rapidly increasing the numbers of their nuclear weapons, can be stopped from doing that. But there is no international traction for this treaty right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sethi. Now I request Dr. Jairaman to take his question. Yes, put it in the chat. Can you take your question, Dr. Jairaman? Yeah, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you for the brilliant exposition. We couldn't have got it from a singular authentic source like this. But my simple question is this. In the context of the Ukraine conflict, as a Pugwash executive member, what would be your read?
You are muted.
Weapons instead of strategic weapons. How will the effect of nuclear deterrence stand, and will Ukraine remain absolutely helpless?
Dr. Sethi.
The distinction between tactical and strategic weapons is really an artificial distinction. You know, the Cold War period, when they were talking about low-yield weapons to be used in the battlefield, they called them the tactical nuclear weapons. And by that, they really meant the US and the USSR were the big players, and they meant that this would be in the European theater. So it was not going to be on their own territories. And this was the idea of tactical nuclear weapons, that they will be, starting the war at a very low level, and that it'll stop there. But any number of war games that have been played between these two superpowers and also between India, Pakistan, India, China at track 2 levels, not at the official level, but at the track 2 levels, have always shown that any use of tactical nuclear weapon is going to escalate to the strategic level. Because you can say, I'm using a low yield weapon, depending on the damage you've caused to the other side, what is he going to do? He's going to respond with his nuclear weapons too. And that is going to lead to escalation. Now, you've mentioned Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear weapons capability. And it's unlikely that NATO will provide it with nuclear weapons to do anything to Russia. So again, as I said, Russia is making this threat for the purpose of deterrence, to stop the US and NATO from interfering in Ukraine, from achieving the political objective that it wants to get to, and to stop Ukraine from going ahead with its resistance. But unfortunately, I mean, that's not how it's working out. And one cannot, I would say the chances of any use of a nuclear weapon, really, tactical nuclear weapon included, is extremely low. Russia is known to have tactical nuclear weapons. It has something like 1,900 tactical nuclear weapons. But the use of such a weapon, in fact, I would say what this conflict has shown up is that the military utility of the weapon is zero. You can use it for your bluster, for creating all this furor about nuclear weapons, about brinksmanship with nuclear weapons, about deterrence. But military use of the weapon is something which is of no use. And therefore, I would say India's nuclear doctrine, which suggests a no first use posture, which is to say that I am not going to be the first to use nuclear weapons. You use it against me, then I will retaliate to cause you unacceptable damage. That is the good strategy to have. To say that, I'm not putting you on the edge that you have to use your nuclear weapon. It's a call that you can take. But once you have taken that call, the retaliation from my side is going to nullify any gain that you want to make. So Russia has a first use doctrine. It is making all these noises, but I don't expect that such use would bring any benefits to Putin. Rather, it is going to demonize him forever. So that's my answer to it. There is no difference between tactical and strategic weapons. It's only very theoretical, very notional. But in real usage of weapons, there's nothing like tactical or strategic.
Thank you, Dr. Sethi. I see Dr. Mir raising the hand. Dr. Mir, please. Dr.
Hello,
Mir? Yeah.
one and all. I'm Zohar Mir, and I'm doing my PhD research from Jamia Millia Islamia. And I want to ask two questions to ma'am. One question is about the cyber attack that happened in 2019 on the Kundankulam power plant. And there were two more incidents about this. There were the recoveries of this weapons grade usable material from the black market in Mumbai and Kolkata. It was in 2021 and 2020. And there was an article written by Graham Allison on the nuclear terrorism. It was titled as "Did We Beat the Changes or Add Them?" in which he argued that the nuclear terrorist attack on the American soil in a decade is inevitable. He was responding to the critiques when he had written a book on the nuclear terrorism, in which he had said that the nuclear terrorist attack on the American soil in a decade. He had written that book in 2004, and he had claimed that in a coming decade, there would be a nuclear terrorist attack, and that didn't happen. And he was responding to those critics that it didn't happen. So how do you respond that? He said that there were some precautionary measures taken by the USA, so it didn't happen. Now, I see despite taking those measures, the nuclear attack on American soil in a decade is inevitable. How do you respond to that? And how do you respond to the Kundankulam attack? Is cyber attack a possibility from a nuclear, this non-state actor or not in India?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mir, for all your questions. Firstly, to say whether the attack was predicted in 2004, it's not happened in a decade. I don't think it should give us a sense of comfort that it will not happen. So there's no reason for us to be gloating over it. And there's no reason for us to be complacent that because it's not happened in 10 years, it will not happen in the future. So I think as India's strategy is, we have to keep our eyes on the ball. We have to keep ourselves aware of the possibilities of nuclear terrorism of all the kinds that I've spoken about, and to get the international community to retain its focus on this particular issue. Because as I said, no nation can say, I will be able to secure myself against the threat of nuclear terrorism. There is too much possibility of things happening from outside, and therefore you have to remain engaged with the international community on this. That's what the US realized. It's the superpower of the day. And yet it realizes that unless it engages everyone, that's why I said Obama put together everyone to come and talk about this particular issue to make sure that such a thing would not happen. And therefore, there is no room for complacency. I ended by saying nuclear security is not a destination. Never will you be able to say I've reached nuclear security. You have to keep at it because the threat is going to evolve. Our capabilities are evolving, our infrastructure is evolving. In fact, in today's time, when environmental security is such an important issue and nuclear power as a low carbon source is being seen as one of the answers to the problems of climate change, the interest in nuclear energy, setting up nuclear energy for the first time in many countries is going up. So the numbers of users of nuclear energy are going to grow, and therefore we have to be careful with nuclear security dimensions as well. So whatever Graham Allison might have said in 2004, I think it was a wake-up call, and we must continue to keep our eyes wide open on the threat of nuclear security. Now, to your two other points about the cyber attack on Kudankulam, yes, we are all aware of the details of what happened. Thankfully, it was not on the command and control, far, far away from that in one of the ancillary units. But again, all of these are wake-up calls. I have mentioned cyber offensive capability has grown to an extent, including with the non-state actor. And therefore, this threat is a live threat. However, as we have been explained several times by the various establishments, in fact, I just visited the Kudankulam nuclear plant last month in March and spoke about this issue with them. And it was very convincingly, explained to me as to the kind of measures which are taken by the nuclear facilities to keep themselves away from any chances of cyber interference, which is not to say that it could not happen. But every effort is taken. The point is that you are live to the threat, and therefore you are constantly on the lookout for anything that could be a vulnerability in your system. So that's where I would say on the cyber attack on Kudankulam. Again, when incidents like this happen, they become the way in which you would tighten your security measures. You would look at all the vulnerabilities that could exist in the system. The black market, well, I did mention to you, India is a large country. We are looking at the fuel cycle from the first to the end part of it. Some incidents will take place. I think Dr. Pradeep Kumar also mentioned very small quantities of any kind of material has been found in such cases. And the use of that is extremely limited. The fact that they are being caught, that detection is taking place itself, I think, is a positive sign about the kind of procedures which are in place. So, you have to, again, be open to what is coming and be aware of the kind of risks that could exist and take care of them. Dr. Pradeep, I can see you want to say something on this.
Yeah, the question was regarding some of the nuclear material detected in media reports. Let me clarify. See, when we are talking about the nuclear terrorism or the nuclear material which can be used against society, we talk about plutonium, uranium-235, etc. So the uranium which is removed from the natural uranium, what we call depleted uranium, they are all used as shielding material and many other purposes. And some of these incidences which you mentioned, which came in media, they are all depleted uranium. And it cannot lead to any nuclear explosion or any radiological threat to the society. But simply because they were all uranium, the media thought, public thought they are all dangerous material, and it was highlighted in a very, in a wrong way. So I want to stress this point. There are many cases of depleted uranium confiscated in many places from India, either smuggled into country or it may be some earlier shielding material used in some of the radioisotopes of many, many years old. So they don't have anything to do with the nuclear or radiological terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sethi. Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. I would now request Professor Karkera to ask his question.
And Dharmaji Manchanda here.
Just a moment, sir. Professor Karkera had given his question some time back, so I would request him to ask the question, then we will come back to you. Professor Karkera, please. Professor Karkera?
He is not there.
Is not there because he had asked the question about how to address the transparency issues in nuclear safeguards. Okay, Dr. Manchanda, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah. Dr. Sethi, this is Manchanda. My background is radiochemistry. My question is more related to this dirty bomb actually. See, my perception is the easiest way of nuclear terrorism is through dirty bomb. Make use of short-lived radionuclides, the cesium, strontium, which can be easily dissolved also in the stream of water, and then you can create this type of threat. In fact, I have published a note last year in Radiation Protection and Environment on this topic. My question is that when we really look into the last, say, 60 years history of this nuclear industry, there are half a dozen failed attempts as far as the nuclear terrorism through dirty bomb is concerned. Now, you have given one number, 125 incidents reported by 25 states in 2020, similarly 106 by 34 states in 2017. When I take the average of last 50, 60 years, 100 such incident reported, when I say incident reported, I am guessing it must be lost or it may be smuggled type of materials, out of which some of them may also be radiologically important materials. Now, how is it? Do you think that our states, our system have been very, very cautious? We have been perfect in monitoring, that we have been successful in thwarting the efforts of the nuclear terrorists? Because as I mentioned, if you look into this thing, 5,000 such materials or such consignment may have been lost or stolen, out of which few hundred could always be of this type. So how come that we do not have, I mean, we are fortunate, I will say, we don't have much of nuclear terrorism through this dirty bomb. So can you please elaborate on this?
Thank you, sir. If I get your question right, you are basically asking why such an incident has not taken place when so much material has been lost, etc., etc. According to the International Trafficking Database, which started collecting material in '93 up till now, they have reported a total number of about 3,900 odd cases of such material. But they have divided this loss of material and the kind of material into three categories. The maximum number of cases have been in minuscule amounts of, as we said, not very effective radiological material that has been caught. Secondly, if you look at what are the motivations of the terror organizations themselves. So one is access to the material. The other is, do they want to do nuclear terrorism of this kind? Because the terrorist, if you see, wants to have a lot of people watching the incident in order to create the terror in their mind, rather than having a lot of people dead as a result of any such act really taking place. Does it suit their purpose to do something like this, especially when they want to, when they have a grievance with the political system and they want to come into the mainstream? Would they rather do something like this and alienate themselves forever? So one also has to understand what could be the objectives of the terrorist organizations if they wanted to carry out an act of nuclear terrorism. And there are papers which have looked into the motivations of terror organizations and found that not many of them have seen nuclear terrorism as an effective way. of doing something. Certainly, as you mentioned, dirty bomb remains a big threat because it would, for the first time when it happens, breach a psychological level. The impact of that would be extremely high. Dr. Pradeep Kumar and I have, engaged several times on what would be the impact of this, not just the economic impact or the social impact. We were even talking about how road rage would come into the picture because evacuation from that area would be what something would want to do. So the disruption created would be of a different kind by such kind of a radiological dispersal device. We are all fortunate that nothing like this has happened. That should not make us complacent that it cannot happen in the past. We've also seen terror organizations breaching new levels of barbarism. So one cannot put it past them that they might want to achieve a new psychological impact with the kind of terror activity that they want to indulge in. Terror networks are extremely strong at this moment in time. When the Taliban took over as a state actor in Afghanistan, that is one of the concerns that I had about, how things could go awry in this region. But nonetheless, one has to keep studying the strategic culture of the terror organizations as well to understand whether this could be a useful means for them or not.
Okay. So basically what you are telling is that they feel that it doesn't serve the purpose for which actually they are doing the terrorist activity.
Correct, sir. Not many of them have found it matching their objectives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sethi. Now again, I will come back to Sanat Kumar, who started the question answer session before the lecture itself. So, sir, you can proceed, please.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. You said the actual use of a WMD is zero. That is the word you use, zero. So if that be so, then why do countries keep on accumulating WMDs? Russia have got a thing for reduction of those devices, but every other country is going on increasing. So if the thing is zero, why are they building more and more, wasting plutonium, as far as I am concerned? Thank you.
So it is, as I mentioned earlier, for the purpose of deterrence. They feel that the numbers for them and increasing the capabilities for them are important so that the weapon does not come into play. There are only 9 countries which have nuclear weapons, which are known in the world today. 5 of them are the P5 in the NPT, and there are 4 others which are not members of the NPT, as you know, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. All of the 9 countries are expanding their nuclear weapons capabilities, their delivery systems, in order to match what they have in their mind as what would be credible deterrence. For a long period of time, China had 6 nuclear weapons. Mao, when he first detonated the weapon in 1964, he had said all that China needs are 6 nuclear weapons. For a long period of time, China maintained a small nuclear arsenal. The US kept on saying that China is going to expand its nuclear weapons. China did not, because of the understanding that you need a small amount to signal to the other side that you will be not a gainer in any use of your nuclear weapons. But today's China is expanding its nuclear arsenal. In fact, last year reports have come out to say that they are doubling and they are soon going to have something like 700 nuclear weapons. Why are they expanding their capacity? Because they now fear that America's expanded capacity and America's ability to defend itself with a ballistic missile defense will so China's small numbers will not be able to carry out unacceptable damage. The key word here is what is unacceptable to the other side. So in my understanding, what is unacceptable, I have to have that much of capability with me. And therefore, countries are going on increasing. Even though, and the reason they are increasing is because they want that the chance of use should be zero. If they don't increase, then they fear that the other side will be able to carry out a first strike against them and they will lose what they have. So that's the reason why expansion is happening.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sethi. Now I think we have to look at the watch also because the topic is so interesting. We are forgetting to look at the watch and following the timings. So I would request...
Malhotra has a question.
Yeah. Mr. Malhotra, you can have your last question.
No, mine is not really a question. I raised my hand when one of the gentlemen, Mr. Mir, if I remember his name correctly,
Yeah.
He raised a few questions. Dr. Sethi answered, and then Pradeep also further elaborated. And I wanted to elaborate on the same point on this issue of the so-called radioactive material or nuclear material getting caught practically every year. You will always find, I mean, for reasons not known to me, generally in the month of July to September every year, something or the other will be caught, and particularly it is more rampant on the eastern side of the country. And in most of the cases, the material is not even depleted uranium. You know, one such instance I can tell you that sometime I think many years back, I was still in service. About 1 kilogram of so-called yellow cake was caught from a fellow. And finally, it was brought to AMD office at Delhi. And as soon as the packet was opened, I mean, there was no need of any testing to be done. It was actually a yellow-colored resin, generally used for water treatment. So it was a yellow-colored resin, which somebody was trying to sell it as a yellow cake. And what I remember, it was a laughing matter when that material had been caught somewhere, I think eastern UP or Bihar side. So the police officer, I think if I remember correctly, it was a superintendent of police of that city. He, in a very dramatic manner, he told, yes, it is nuclear material because it was in a bag. And when I put my hand inside, so he said in Hindi, when I put my hand inside the bag, मेरा हाथ बिजली के करंट से झंझना उठा. So that was the dramatic way he had told. And the material ultimately turned out to be resin. But anyway, these incidences, we should not become complacent. I mean, we should always be alert. But at the same time, as I want to tell that most of the cases, it is somebody is trying to make fool of maybe somebody else, and in the process he gets caught. I only wanted to make that point.
Yeah. Thank you, Malhotraji, for your contribution. And now anyway, it is going to come to you. So okay. Thanks to everybody for the question answer session. Thanks for a very nice and interesting lecture and the question answer session after that. I am sure that there are still many more questions, but well, we have to look at time constraints and then stop somewhere. So I will hand over now to Mr. Malhotra for a vote of thanks. Mr. Malhotra, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dharne. And first and foremost, I will profusely thank Dr. Manpreet Sethi, today's speaker, eminent speaker, I would say, and fantastic. We also had a change. You know, every time we will hear on a topic which is very much known to us, very much familiar to us, but this was definitely a change, though very much to do with us, but still something we don't usually discuss. So a very, very crisp and informative presentation on the topic, and the interest it created amongst the listeners is evident. That Mr. Dharne had to declare that the question answer session has to end. That means still some unanswered questions are there. So that shows that how useful and was her presentation. So thank you very much, Dr. Sethi, for your time and for your effort. And now, friends, I would like to thank our webinar subcommittee of INS, headed by the convener, Dr. Ramarao. This is the 19th webinar they have successfully carried out. And I think the series is going to continue. And I also thank the entire executive committee of INS, including our respected president, Shri S.K. Mehta. Usually he is very regularly he is present in our webinars, but today, because of some exigency in his family, he could not be present. But anyway, we are so thankful to him for guiding us, not only in the matter of these webinars, but in overall activities of INS. I also thank all the members of INS for their support in all our activities. I am very thankful to the audiences who keep coming in good numbers, and through their question answer session, they make the entire this episode quite lively. And as I do every week, I thank our treasurer, Shri G.D. Mittal, particularly not in his role as treasurer. So Dr. G.D. Mittal and Dr. Shimjit Rajgopal of BARC for their efforts in propagating the information about this webinar through various platforms. And another thing which usually I do at the end of my vote of thanks is that I inform about the next webinar. But unfortunately today, we are not ready with any announcement. So maybe whenever we have something to announce, we will reach you through Dr. Shimjit Rajgopal and Mr. G.D. Mittal. You will hear from us. As of now, we are not ready with the announcement for next webinar. So with that, I thank each and everyone, all of you. So see you in our next webinar. Thank you very much. Good evening. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sethi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Bye-bye,
Had a nice
everyone.
time with you.
Thank you all.